Welcome to the Build Your Private Practice podcast, a space for Canadian therapists who want to support others, make an impact, and build a sustainable practice that works for them too. I'm your host, Liane Wood, a registered psychotherapist, group practice owner, and business mentor, and I'm here to help you build a private practice that allows you to keep doing the work you love without burning out. Because the people who need your help the most are counting on you, and you deserve a practice that supports you while you support them. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Build Your Private Practice podcast. I'm so glad you're here. As therapists in private practice, we often wear so many hats: clinician, business owner, marketer, and yes, sometimes legal administrator. But when it comes to the legal side of growing and protecting your practice, most of us feel a little uncertain. And that's why I'm so excited for today's conversation. I'm joined by Elena Favaro Viana, founder of EFV Legal Professional Corporation. Elena and her team specialize in supporting healthcare practitioners, including psychologists, therapists, and social workers, through every stage of private practice growth, from your very first client to hiring your team to selling your practice down the road. So, in this episode, we're talking about the legal foundations every private practice owner needs to know, the biggest legal mistakes Elena sees so you can avoid them, and what it really takes to grow a practice with legal confidence as you bring on associates or multidisciplinary team members. Elena, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation.
Amazing. Well, let's start with a big picture question. Can you share a little bit with our community about your work at EFV Legal and how you support healthcare practitioners like therapists?
Absolutely. So we started the practice back during the COVID era. So in 2020, started a little bit of an accident. It's actually grown into something much larger, more beautiful than I could ever imagine. And as part of that, one of our largest client bases has actually become healthcare practitioners. It's
Hmm.
become a lot of individuals that have either just graduated or become licensed and qualified and are growing their practices, opening their clinics, building teams, moving into brick and mortars. And there's a variety of different problems that come with sort of that startup phase for the healthcare practitioner world. And so we work with a variety of individuals that are doing that. And it's been very fruitful. We also work with small business owners and entrepreneurs, and there is really an overlap between all of them. When you're starting a business, when you're starting a practice, when you're starting a clinic, there are just common pitfalls that everybody falls into. And so my firm really has been born out of a mission to professionalize the small business landscape, and to really empower individuals that are walking on this journey. You're not a transaction. You're meant to understand the legal side as well because you're the one dealing with it on the day to day.
Amazing. That sounds incredible, your journey, kind of starting off. And I mean, as a therapist, I love that you're specializing in helping health professionals. What do when you're working with people, where do you think most therapists go wrong legally when they're starting or growing a practice?
So many places. So,
Oh,
so the first thing is, to be perfectly honest, is that when you're starting and opening a practice, are you actually going all in on it? And what I find here is that people are teetering into it. So they're testing the waters, maybe starting as a side hustle without full commitment. And that really is mistake number one because your new venture here requires a legal foundation. And so understanding the business structure in which you want to be operating out of is mistake number one. I find
mhm,
when you're sort of teetering into it, you're not setting it up properly. And so when I'm talking about setting up properly, this is one, the foundation, the actual business structure, the legal foundation, the entity that you choose to operate out of. So there's really two or three main structures, which is the sole proprietorship, partnership, or corporation. And
mhm,
for many practitioners, they also have the option to do a professional corporation. And I
mhm,
find when we have these options on the table, there is no education on which one is the correct entity in order to move forward into. And when you start do a little quick Google search, start a business, you're going to be inundated with softwares or companies that are telling you to incorporate a business because that is, how you register a business here in Ontario or in Canada, which is
mhm.
the furthest thing from the truth. You can actually start a business tomorrow without doing any registration whatsoever under your full legal name. So,
Mhm.
if you're a therapist, you're probably operating under your full legal name. You don't have a brand name. You don't even need to register anything. So, the main things to consider is, do you want to be a sole proprietor? Are you going into business with a partner? So, you're considering a partnership, or do you need a corporation? Now, the corporation is sort of the graduation level of business. And I find a lot of people start there because, like I said, they Google it and they're like, oh, perfect, I'll register a corporation. And then there's sort of the secondary level of a professional corporation. So what we are doing a lot at the firm is actually correcting business foundations that were set up incorrectly. So somebody will register a corporation and then it won't be actually compliant with your regulatory college. So we now need to switch it from a corporation to a professional corporation.
Mhm.
Second problem there is, okay, now you have a professional corporation, it's been set up correctly. However, you haven't really fully committed to your business. So, meaning you're pre-revenue, you're not making enough revenue, or maybe your first year wasn't financially as successful as you were hoping it to be. And having a corporation actually requires you to have some financial backing in order to maintain it. It is an
Mhm.
expense to have a corporation, it's not free. So, in
Mhm.
that instance, the individual or the therapist would have benefited from a sole proprietorship, which, there is no registration, it's completely free to have. And that allows you to sort of get your feet wet in the business world and then grow your practice. And then eventually, when you have enough revenue, then convert it into um, a legally sound professional corporation if that's the route you want to go. So, with
Mhm.
all of this, the foundation is really the biggest piece here is, and I stress this because you do need advice. It is such a
Mhm.
custom experience to you. And when you're
Mhm.
setting up a business, the advice that you should be seeking is not from another clinician or practitioner or somebody from your college. I know a lot of these colleges also have free legal helplines. Whether they're good or not, I can't comment on, but I do know that the advice that you want to be seeking from is really from your accountant, and you should be building a relationship with your accountant, and from your lawyer. And you should be
Mhm.
building a relationship with your lawyer because as a business owner, the success of business owners, you hear them all the time. They go for lunch with their lawyer and accountant. So that
Mhm.
relationship is really important to start building. So that's sort of the first thing. And then
Mhm.
the second thing, to not be too winded, Liane, is is really the intake forms. That's really the
Mhm.
first sort of thing you do on the legal side when you set up a practice. You probably get some software like Jane, and then there's intake forms that you need to be putting in there. And these
Mhm.
intake forms, I'm telling you, almost the majority of the work that we do is rewriting these intake
Oh,
forms.
okay.
We're
Mhm.
reviewing them, we're rewriting them. They're very lengthy documents, and I find that when people are putting them through AI software or using sort of the free templates that are out there, they're actually not supporting the practice or the vision that you have. So your intake form is twofold. It is an introduction to your practice, your policies, your values, your mission, how you want to be operating
Mhm.
differently in the space, but
Yeah.
also legal protection. It's legal protection for both you and for the client or patient that you're seeing.
Mhm.
So that's,
Amazing.
yeah, the issues.
And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, how right you are just in terms of there's so many therapists and other health practitioners I'm not so sure about, but that I know in the mental health world who, because it is so easy to just start a sole proprietorship, missing the pieces of getting sound accounting and legal advice
Yes.
so that, things are done well. And I think part of the challenge is that for many mental health practitioners, this is kind of their first foray into the business world. And it's such we're trained as therapists to be therapists and to be in client sessions. But our education programs don't even touch on the side of private practice. And so I love how, talking about setting the foundation. I'm
Mhm.
right on board with you, getting some legal advice, getting a little bit of accounting advice right out the get-go. So if
Yeah,
we
because
Go ahead. Mhm.
no, sorry, because one of the main questions I get is when should I be getting this advice? How soon is too soon?
Right. Yeah.
And literally yesterday, the firm, we signed a client who's looking to open a private practice in September of 2026, which is almost a year and a half from now. And
Right.
the first question they asked me on sort of the consult was, is it too soon to be talking about this? Absolutely not. It is not too soon because
Right.
putting the strategy and the foundation in place is the most important piece. And I know that a lot of practitioners are probably working in a clinic, they're working as a
Mhm.
contractor somewhere else, and they're
Mhm.
thinking about making the jump. And
Mhm.
so the mistake that they're doing is waiting till they've made the jump to then seek the advice
Mhm.
versus set yourself up properly from the get-go. Give yourself a runway. I mean, 3 months is a very good runway. of getting the advice, getting things set up before you take that jump.
Right, right. Incredible. Now, once therapists kind of have their practice set
Mhm.
up and they're going, that type of thing, when they're getting ready to maybe expand and hire associates, right? What do they need to know at that point legally?
Yeah, I love this question so much because it's also a massive mistake, I will say, is
Mm,
so when you're hiring, okay, you need to be very, very careful of how you're hiring. There is a big distinction here in Canada between independent contractors and employees.
mhm,
Now, the healthcare world is so fascinating because it truly has created almost a gray area. There is something called a dependent contractor.
mhm,
So getting, making sure that you're classifying your associates properly and giving them the correct agreement in when you're onboarding them is so, so important because you can actually open yourself up to a wide variety of liability here as the
okay,
clinic owner, right? So as the clinician. So when you're looking to get so when you're looking to get associates, the easiest thing that we see and the most common thing that we see is contractors, in which the individual comes, they're operating out of your brand, they're either fed clients or they're meant to go procure their own clients, and then there's usually some type of commission split fee. So you want to make sure that you have a contract that supports that relationship.
mhm,
But the biggest pitfall here that I'm seeing when you're expanding is the exit strategy of that associate or contractor once you've had them. And
mhm,
a lot of people are putting unenforceable legal terms in terms of non-competition, non-solicitation,
yeah,
patient client ownership. These are the types of pieces that you want to be talking about on day one, not at the end. So
right,
I
mhm,
believe in preventative law. We want to minimize disputes always. And this
mhm,
is where the majority of disputes come from. You've
mhm,
built a practice, you've been feeding clients to the associate, now the associate's left and taken everybody with them, which is of course the right of the patient or the client to choose where they want to go.
yeah,
So how you handle that exit strategy should really be discussed at the beginning.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and getting that boundary in place. Now, I talked about this gray area. The dependent contractor is if you have a contractor that is really working part-time for you, that isn't necessarily an employee, they're still falling in the contractor role, but they gain the majority of their income from your practice, you need to be very careful here. You need to be
mm,
very, very careful because when it comes to potentially terminating that individual, you might be stuck under the Employment Standards Act, whereas this contractor essentially is being treated as an employee. And this is where the liability opens up for you. So
mhm,
you have to follow distinct rules under the Employment Standards Act to remove that person from your practice and not necessarily what the contract says. And so we always say too, when you're growing, it isn't so much about hiring, which is so, so, so exciting. And the majority of us are like, hire, you start on Monday. Like, and we just sort of onboard them without thinking. You need to onboard them always with the end in mind. What is
mhm,
the end? Because that truly is where all of the issues, all of the disputes, and all of the liability lives is at the end. So you want to make sure you have a proper contract in place. Now, if you're hiring somebody that's not an associate, that is support staff, like a receptionist, definitely check in with your accountant how they're to be classified because 9 times out of 10, a receptionist is not a contractor, they're an employee.
mhm.
And so this distinction is very, very important because you can get into a lot of trouble also with the Canadian Revenue Agency if you're classifying your hires incorrectly and giving them the wrong contractor and paying them the wrong way. So just be very
Mhm.
careful there.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I think this is maybe only the second time I've heard dependent contractor. And
Oh,
but lovely explanation that you're giving on that. That actually clarified a couple of things for me around that. So that's amazing. That's amazing. Um, there's a lot of practices run by mental health practitioners that are exclusively mental health practitioners.
mhm,
But I'm seeing more and more, people sort of getting into multidisciplinary clinics. And
yes.
this is something that many therapists are really curious about. So, when we start thinking about multidisciplinary clinics, what should practice owners know before they consider expanding into that type of model?
So this is very, very tricky. And I will tell you that from my experience, the majority of the regulatory colleges are also silent on the idea of multidisciplinary clinics, almost as if it's frowned upon.
Mm,
And that's just sort of my personal opinion. And so essentially, if you've decided with the foundation that you want to have a professional corporation, or if you have a professional corporation, you may already be aware that you are sort of forbidden from hiring or working with anybody that is not within the same regulatory college as you. So if you're bound by the CRPO, you can only work with other psychotherapists and only hire other psychotherapists or ancillary staff. meaning receptionists or support staff for psychotherapists. It
Mm-hmm.
basically prohibits you under your professional corporation to go into practice with a chiropractor, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're driving around in the cities, we see all these multidisciplinary clinics that are offering chiropractor, therapy, nursing, whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm.
Therapy, so why are they allowed to do it when the majority of regulatory colleges seem to frown upon it? And it
Mm-hmm.
really comes down to the structure. So there are, and it's very interesting because me and a very close accountant colleague who works exclusively with healthcare practitioners, I don't know how many lunches we've had debating the best way to set up a multidisciplinary clinic. And there seems to be multiple approaches to it, but it also tells me that it is a very complex setup model that needs to
Mm-hmm.
be done correctly, once again, with your team. You do not do this without your team, meaning your
Mm-hmm.
accountant and lawyer. So when we're setting up a multidisciplinary clinic, we need to think about the foundation. And instead of just having, like we spoke about at the beginning, sort of a sole proprietorship or a partnership or a corporation, we're now looking into a more complex legal foundation where you're dealing the majority of the time with multiple corporations set up, so a multi-corporation entity,
Mm-hmm.
or you are dealing with sort of a room rental management fee arrangement. So there's really these two different routes about going about it. So, and the pros and cons will vary depending on really how successful, how large, and what sort of vision you have for the practice that you're building. So,
Mm-hmm.
so just to reiterate, we can either do a multiple corporation sort of setup in order to essentially bypass some of the regulatory college rules, but that comes down, it's very complicated. So it comes down to figuring out the best flow of client organization, who is hiring the associates, the flow of cash, and
Yeah.
making sure that the liability is still sound. And that's
Mm-hmm.
very unique to each person. Or if you're doing something a little bit simpler, let's say you're a psychotherapist regulated under CRPO, maybe you have a brick and mortar, which really is how this model would work in the second instance, and you have extra rooms available in which you can rent out those rooms to a, ancillary or other industry professionals, but they wouldn't be operating under your brand. They would be operating under their own brand within your space. So
Mm-hmm.
there's really this sort of complex understanding between the two,
Yeah.
and figuring out what is the mission or the vision that you actually have, and then putting it together appropriately from there. But it's something that you also need to decide at the beginning, not necessarily partway through. It's possible partway through, but it's just a bit more expensive.
And it sounds a little more complicated if you have to undo something.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, it isn't a clean answer, unfortunately. It really is one of those answers that it's possible to do, but you cannot just set it up willy-nilly. You need
Right.
to set it up correctly, I think is the main takeaway here.
Right, right. Ah, this is so great. I love this conversation because, for anyone that is thinking about this, I think this is just so valuable and rich, this conversation.
Thank you.
Something else that comes up a lot is, well, maybe not a lot, but I'm seeing more therapists when they're getting to sort of, the end of their time in their private practice. Like, they're thinking about, I want to retire or, I
Mhm.
want to somehow step back from this. Some therapists close down their practices, but there are more therapists that are really not realizing that their practice might be a sellable asset. And
Yes.
so I'd love to, just kind of dabble into that a little bit with you and talk about what makes a practice legally sellable.
I love the way you say that they don't realize because that
Mhm.
is absolutely true. A
Mhm.
lot of business owners think, oh, business isn't going well, or I'm ready to change direction, or I'm, interested in a new chapter of my life, whatever that may be, and they just close doors.
Yeah.
And that is such a missed opportunity because you've built something, you have
Mhm.
something, and you can sell that thing that you've built.
Mhm.
So just to give you a really sort of secondary example, somebody can build a Shopify website and secure inventory. Maybe they sell
Yeah.
watches on a Shopify website. And this Shopify website has made zero sales, $0. So they might think, oh, well, this business was a flop, they'll close doors. That is a mistake already because what they've done is they put the sweat equity and they've built a brand on this website that they can already sell for a menial amount, maybe $5,000 or $10,000, that somebody would have to pay a designer in order to build their Shopify website. So they might as well pick up where you've left off and buy that. So when we're
Mhm.
thinking about your practice, You have built a brand, you've built a logo, you have now put together beautiful intake forms because you've got them legally drafted. You put
Mhm.
together a business structure that you spent a lot of time making sure was correct for what you put together. You've built goodwill within your community. You have a client base. You have, standard operating procedures. You may have partnerships. All of this is really a value associated with your business that
Yeah.
somebody could easily, just sort of step into your business and take over where you've left off. And
Mhm.
that is something that we can't really overlook. So a big theme here is when you're starting something is always thinking about the exit strategy in the end. When you're
Yeah.
putting it together, we always talk about how we leave it, how we exit it, how we close it down, because the
Mhm.
two always marry. And we always, for some reason, we never think about the end, but you have to. It's so important. So you can sell the business that you've put together. And there are so many therapists and other healthcare practitioners out there that are looking to buy what's already in existence, looking to
Mhm.
sort of, turnkey into a business that's already operating, or looking to buy a book of business, or let's say you have a brick and mortar and you've already furnished it with tables and chairs and computers. Those are
Mhm.
assets that can be sold at a minimal level as well. So
Mhm.
all of these different ways, you can definitely sell piecemeal off the business you've created or sell it as a whole. So you really should be thinking about this at all times. And it's really something that we do so often in the firm is you're looking at maybe the revenue that your business is bringing in, and then you sort of double that revenue, and that's sort of your purchase price going into it. So somebody coming in to buy it would make back their return on investment within 2 years and the opportunity to continue growing from there. And there's a variety of factors that go into the valuation, but that's a very easy number to put in your head is, okay, well, if my business made 50,000 last year, I can easily go for an asking price of 100,000 plus or minus and start
Mhm.
shopping around for buyers from there.
Mhm. I absolutely love this. I being a for me, being a psychotherapist is an encore
Yeah.
career. I was previously in the insurance world for over 25
Oh,
years.
wow.
Yeah, and I owned 3 different brokerages, and went through, as an insurance executive, I went through several mergers, acquisitions. I sold my last practice, before I went back to school to be a therapist, and so it was actually shocking to me to come into the therapy world and seeing therapists closing down their practices,
So many.
because I know how much work goes into
Hmm.
building a practice, and just thinking about, new therapists coming in or whatever, some of them don't want to do all that hard work to build up a practice. And the other piece of it is on the purchaser's side, some people think, oh, I have to have all this money up front to be able to
No.
practice. Right? Yeah. And you don't, right? There's so many ways to structure an acquisition that don't require massive outlays of cash.
Agreed.
And so, I just want to throw that in as a tidbit is that, it is possible to structure a deal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I didn't even go into that, but yeah, structuring the deal, you can definitely consider sort of like a vendor take back mortgage in which
Yeah,
the seller puts forward the amount of money that's missing. So if you're purchasing a business for 100,000, let's in the example I gave before,
yeah,
maybe you put down 10,000 on closing and then 90,000 will be paid out effectively over a payment plan over 2 to 3 years.
right.
Um, and the seller takes sort of the risk or the security to give you that $90,000 that you're effectively paying them back on the agreed purchase price. So it's definitely accessible. It's very
Mhm.
easy. I don't want to say it's easy, but accessible absolutely in order to do something like this.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Well, we've talked about so many things
Yes.
here today, and I know we're really just barely scratching the surface on many of them. But if you could give one piece of advice to a therapist who wants to feel more legally confident in their practice, what would it be? Mm.
I thought I would have an answer by now. For the one for the one thing. To be honest, it's if you're building a practice, is to treat it like a business.
Mm,
Really, treat it like a business. A business will only grow and be successful if you treat it that way. If you are just teetering into it or testing the waters,
mhm,
it's not, some people get lucky, of course, but no, you need to go all in. And going all in, of course, I'm biased when I say this, but it is making the right relationships. It is investing in what actually matters in the long run. I know a lot of people, when we start businesses, are very excited about the logo and the branding, and a lot of money goes into marketing. but do not overlook the things that will keep you actually in business. The majority
Hmm.
of businesses fail between year 1 and 3. And I believe something like 50% of businesses don't even make it to year 5. So you want to be the one that makes it to year 6 plus and beyond.
Yeah.
And that means getting a bookkeeper. That means getting an accountant. That means working with a lawyer that you actually like, that doesn't make you feel inferior or transactional, and build relationships with these people and set aside, you know, just consider them a cost of doing business, because the more you spend time with your support team, really your accountants, bookkeepers, lawyers, the more you're going to learn, the more you're going to be here and financially and foundationally strong. So
Mhm.
treat it like an actual business. The boring stuff is what keeps you in business. And
Mhm.
I know that the law is not sexy by any means, but it can also be very fun and a very beautiful piece of business. And the more that you grow, just know that there's going to always be a new level, new devil. So there will always be another turn around the corner that you need support on. And so building that relationship with your preferred lawyer is so important, because then they know your business and they can help you and they can help you. The thing too about business lawyers, I find that people don't realize is, they have worked with, I mean, we've worked with over 700 businesses at this point. So
Mhm.
the value that we can provide, not just on legal, but on business development, is also there. So really
Mhm.
leverage the people that you choose to work with.
Mhm. Amazing. That's so true, right? Treating your practice as a business. And I think that is a piece that perhaps, therapists miss. When I'm working with therapists, the idea that their private practice is a business, that they are an entrepreneur, that they own a
Yes,
business, they'll look at me like, what are you talking about? I'm just a therapist. I see clients. Like, no, this is a business. And
a
so,
business.
yeah, that is just massive and huge. So thank you for
Yeah.
that piece of
The
it.
clients will come. They always come. If you do a good
Yeah.
job, the clients will come. So
Mhm.
just you have to trust the process.
Absolutely, absolutely. Elena, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for sharing your expertise and making the legal side of practice feel so much more approachable and accessible. I know for so many therapists listening to this, that this conversation hopefully will spark action. Whether it's reviewing your contracts, your intake forms, or looking at how you're setting up your business structure, or simply realizing that you do not have to navigate this alone. So
Hmm.
we're going to be sure to have a link to Elena's law practice in the show notes so that listeners can connect directly with you if they want to learn more or get support. So thank you so much for being here with me today, Elena.
Thank you so much for having me. This was actually a lot of fun, and I hope some tidbit, some value was actually imparted.
Amazing. And as always, if you found this episode helpful, I'd love for you to share it with a colleague or leave a quick review because it helps us reach more mental health practitioners who need this support. So thank you for tuning in. And until next time, keep building a private practice that works for you. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Build Your Private Practice podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd love it if you'd subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a fellow Canadian therapist who needs this. And remember, the work you do matters. Keep showing up, keep holding space, and keep building a practice that works for you. If you're looking for practical tools or support to grow your practice with more clarity and confidence, head to buildyourprivatepractice.ca. There's lots waiting for you there. I'll see you next time.